Welcome to another Wine Wednesday. I'm Kevin Addix, Executive Director of the Maryland Wineries Association, and here because we've got something to honor. It is the first day of the legislative session, and while that may not be on many people's radar, for the wine industry and other regulated industries, it's a big deal because that's where we have to go to get our laws passed to make good things happen. And got some very good people here to talk with us. First, I want to bring on Tom Krogan, who is our current Government Affairs Committee Chair of the last number of years. Tom's with Vineyards at Doden. And Tom, you've seen a lot in the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's right. I have to say I'm really focused on the pandemic right now. And we'll talk about some of the changes in the laws that we're going to working on for this year, for this session.
We'll talk about that because the legislature, of course, as they started this afternoon, they're focused on the pandemic as well, and we've got some issues our industry is trying to get in front of them, and of course they are pandemic related. I also want to bring on the long-time former chair of the Government Affairs Committee, Rob DeFord from Bordy Vineyards.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So, and we have this very interesting special treat. I wanted to bring on a good friend of the industry and someone who kind of coming on a little unannounced, but former Senator Mac Middleton.
Mac.
Good to see you.
How are you?
Oh, Mac, we can't hear you. Let me see. You're unmuted. There you go.
Okay, good. It's great seeing you, Rob.
Nice to see you. God, this is a treat. Kevin sprung this one on it.
Yeah, my dad would say, you're like great wine. You improve with age.
Oh, well, that's kind of you. Thanks. Same to you, Mac.
So, Mac, I don't know if you've had a chance to meet Tom Krogan from Vineyards at Doden.
No, I haven't. I haven't.
Nice to see you again.
A pleasure meeting you.
So
I hope it won't be in this virtual setting the next time we meet, though.
I hope
Agreed.
not.
Agreed.
So Mac, we're gonna jump to what's relevant to you, which is we're celebrating the 10th year anniversary of our Maryland Winery Modernization Act, and I think it serves as a great example. And then after we talk about this, I'm going to take a dive back into history with Rob, and then talk about our current issues with Tom. But going back a decade, our wineries were really struggling because the other states around us were advancing so significantly with their laws. And yet we had these really, really wonky laws where we weren't able to give samples outright. We weren't able to sell glasses of wine. We could only give samples if someone participated in a walking guided tour. We got charged and brought to Annapolis headquarters if we had tables or chairs in our winery. We couldn't sell wine to go except for 1 quart per person per brand per year. We couldn't direct ship. There were all of these things, and we kept banging our head against the wall in Annapolis. And then we met you.
And the rest is history.
So walk us through what you remember from that effort, because we had spent the whole prior year working on it and getting beaten back, and then things began to break in 2010.
Yeah, actually, it goes back a little bit farther than that. I remember being a co-sponsor with Senator Munson that set up the council, and was very, very pleased to get that going. You know, it was the first time that there was a formal recognition of the Maryland wineries. It was a great first step. And then after that, in that brick wall that you talked about, is the 3-tiered system that had been in place for, I guess, over 50, 75 years. And until that wall had never, ever been penetrated. And because I believed in the cause, and because my wonderful legislative assistant, Susan, was so taken with Bob DeFord that we decided that we were going to take that issue up. And it's one of those issues that, like a few others that I had, that you spent almost the entire session with one work group after another work group. And I remember coming to Annapolis, Susan and I, every Monday during the session for what seemed like the entirety of the session. And we finally brokered a compromise. And that was a very, very, very beginning. And what made it easier is, Bob, you and your membership were there every Monday practically. So it was well worth the fight. And look where we've come since then. Our winery folks are one of the big economic development drivers in the state of Maryland now. Before the pandemic, people would come from outside. I can remember in Charles County, for instance, our College of Southern Maryland to have a wine tasting. They had to go to King George of Virginia, the Northern Neck, to do it. Now we're having all of those events right here in the great state of Maryland because of all the efforts that you've all put into it. So you paved the way for just what's become a great economic development, and also some of the wines that Maryland is producing. I never thought that because of our humidity and whatnot, we could grow a suitable wine for a suitable grape for good wine. But there's some really good wines being produced here in the state of Maryland.
Yeah, we've got two of the top producers right here on this chat. So Rob, you remember back in all of the shoe leather that the self-distribution battle and then this battle in 2010 brought us. I mean, it was so much effort, and I remember sitting up in the gallery. I was telling Senator Middleton this, and watching as our bill kept getting buried on sine die the last day of session, and then Susan would run out and pull that bill and put it on the top, and Mike Miller would accept a whole nother stack of bills and she'd pull it and put it on the top. And it was something like 10 or 10:30 at night, getting very close to the end of the session.
Later, it was even later.
Was it really? I mean,
11:59.59.
Right, it was the last. It may have been the last bill of the session, actually.
Mac, my bedtime is 9:30, come what may, but I stayed up for that one. I'm telling you, that was a night, and it was printed on pink paper. Remember that?
Yep.
So that it would catch the attention amid all the piles of white paper. Ours was on pink paper, so that Mike would see it.
That's one of the geniuses of Susan Lawrence. Another one of the many.
Oh, I'll tell you. Well, I'll say that was for me probably the legislative high point of my career. And I was active in Washington and in Annapolis. That was my favorite year. You made it an absolutely wonderful experience. You and Susan both. And we really enjoyed interacting with you all because I'll say when I started, I started in 1980 as a winery owner, and my first attempt at doing anything in Annapolis was 1981, and I testified. William Pyle was then the chief regulator, and I testified for something called catalog sales for wine, which would be equivalent to direct shipping today. And I noticed that I was the only one testifying, and that against me there were 5 or 6 people, and every one of them, well, 3 or 4 of them were from the state, and the others were retailers, beer wholesalers, and on. And I thought, I'm supposed to stay in my lane here. I don't think they want us to, they don't want us to bust out of our lane. Well, it took 30 years for that to pass. It passed in, I think, 2011. All we did was we fought for our lives. We created the association in 1984 to create the Maryland Wine Festival, the first of its kind. I served as the first president, which was a great honor. But, the first thing we had to do as owners was trust each other. In industry, before you have an association, you're sort of out competing, and you don't know who your friends are, who your enemies are. Well, first we learned to trust each other. Then we learned to work together. And then slowly but surely, and you may remember Al Kopp, our dear friend who since passed away, he wore out many pairs of shoes in Annapolis. And we fought for festivals, and we fought for the right to taste wine. We fought for the right to sell wine. But I will say the Modernization Act, and I'm going to back up 1 second. 2004, I think, was the year we hired you, Kevin, if I'm not mistaken. I will say without reservation, that's the best thing we ever did, and I'll say that to this day. because we needed someone who was not running a winery to take care of us. And no one has done a better job than Kevin. And I think that what we've achieved has been awesome. And I think that the vision, Mac, that you had, and Senator Munson also, and a few others, that this could actually become an economic driver in Maryland seemed very far-fetched at one point. We used to repeat it religiously, but behind closed doors, we'd say, really? You really think that's possible? Well, it really was, and it really has become a dream come true for the state and for us. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, one of the other things that I connecting to today, there's a big discussion happening in DC right now, as we all know, and the gentleman who's in charge of that, Congressman Jamie Raskin, I just listened to his floor speech about our legislation back in 2010. Rob, if you remember, and Tom, and Senator, you probably were paying attention too. We were trying to get our modernization bill passed, and it was up for second reader, and there was discussion, and Senator Bobby Zirkin was trying to attach direct shipping as an amendment to our Modernization Act. And it put us in the very awkward position of having just worked out this whole deal with the Modernization Act while still fighting for direct shipping, but realizing that this was not the year for direct shipping. Zirkin was trying to attach it as an amendment. And Jamie Raskin stood up and gave this phenomenal 10-minute floor speech about the Constitution and the constitutionality of all these things, and how he urges the chairwoman to please bring the shipping bill out of committee for its rightful vote, but at the same time we need to support the wineries, and urging Senator Zirkin to withdraw his amendment. And it went on for about 25 minutes and was finally withdrawn, and we were able to get our bill passed. But that recording, I still have that recording, and it's amazing, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of the same passion and words that Jamie Raskin, who's had a tough couple of weeks, but to hear him again and knowing that he was one of our champions, it's really cool. It's really great to see that history.
Yeah, amendments like that we refer to as killer amendments that would have killed the bill. A lot of people that would have voted for the wine bill would not have voted for it with that amendment on it. So
right,
mess up a good bill.
Yeah.
And I've seen that repeated time and time again. When somebody can't get their bill, they'll try to find an amendment that they can affix it to.
Yeah. Direct shipping was such a big deal that it needed to stand on its own and be debated on its own merits.
Yep.
And Mac, I took my daughter down to DC to see the Supreme Court argue what's called Granholm. And that was, God, I don't remember what year that was, 08, 05, 05, I think it was. She was studying the Supreme Court in high school, and there happened to be this case which determined the fate of direct shipping argued at the Supreme Court. And there was a line stretching around the block at 7 in the morning in the rain to see it. And we were the last two they let in. And it was a remarkable experience to see that. And then we've been dealing with, we've benefited from that ever since. It's been a very, I will say for the COVID period we've been in, direct shipping has saved us. Mm-hmm. It's extremely important, and I don't think retailers, the big fear was that it would hurt retailers. We don't want to hurt retailers. We really don't. And that's another point we've had to make again and again, is we're not against you. We're with you. We just want you to sell more Maryland wine, please.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, how many wineries do we have in the state now?
Oh, we're up to a little over 100 right now, 100 licensed wineries.
Goodness. And we have more grape growers than we have wineries, I take it. There's a lot of them producing grapes for other wineries.
So many of our wineries grow grapes as well, and then there's about 30 independent growers who are not wineries around the state. Right. So and it's good because where you grow the grapes makes a big difference, and not every winery is able to grow all of their own grapes. So there's a lot of grapes on the market. Tom, I wanted to talk with you. Maybe you can explain our process just internally. It may not be the most interesting thing ever, but it's interesting to figure out how an industry comes to a position and takes a bill to Annapolis. You're the chair of the Government Affairs Committee, which this time of year meets weekly on Friday mornings. Walk us through kind of how we get to the point of supporting or opposing a bill.
Sure. So part of that comes from the origin of the bill itself. There are very often bills that are sort of on the agenda of other organizations. We're not privy to their agenda, and they just sort of appear. And so we very quickly have to analyze those bills, reach out, whether we're wanting to make an amendment to do something, because very often I'll just pick on something, an environmental bill that may unintentionally negatively impact the wineries. And so we want to reach out and say, this could have detrimental effects. We don't think that's what you want to do. And then we'll work something out. There's that. The other side is that we do have a legislative agenda, and we'll talk a little bit more later about what that is for this year. But our committee starts meeting early in the spring to be thinking about the types of things, the types of changes that we think will be needed in the coming whatever period, and we start to hash out what that might look like. We identify potential sponsors, and so we go through it, and we have a committee that's about 10 people strong, from representing all parts of the industry, including the growers, the independent growers, and we will flesh out what that bill might look like. We'll talk to other industries and organizations to try and understand that, to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences on their industry. Rob mentioned very often the types of things that we're interested in doing will have an impact on our customers, the retailers or the restaurants. And so we want to make sure that there's understanding about what our goals are and try and work those things out in advance. And then at this time of year, of course, those things are all worked out within our committee. We've often taken them to the MWA board of directors, and we will have identified sponsors. And at that point, then it becomes an issue of working with the sponsors, talking to legislators that may have concerns or that want to know more, and building some support for the bill as it goes through the legislative process.
And Mac, just hearing from you, in your role as a senator, how would you receive these requests from groups saying, "Hey, would you be willing to sponsor a bill?" What do you look for? Because at the end of the day, it's not just a request; it's a request to actually change the law, change the statute.
Well, I will always look favorably on any bill that has a direct or indirect connection with agriculture. That's the first thing. Yeah. I had the privilege, and it's sort of a sad privilege, of being the only full-time farmer left in the legislature at that time. So, and I've looked at, we're engaged, Kevin and myself, on another venture looking at growing industrial hemp for the fiber in Maryland. And it's one of those things that I believe, as a farmer, that we need to have as many opportunities and new opportunities for our farming communities we can possibly get. Always looking for another one. And so that's the first thing, if it's associated with agriculture. What I typically do if I get a request for a sponsorship, I'd like to sit down with not only the lobbyists for that piece of legislation, because typically that's the first person they would have contacted me or my office, but to sit down with the lobbyists and the people that he or she is representing. I want to hear their side of the story. I'd like to look at, figure out who's going to be for it, who's going to be against it, what support you think you may already have in the legislature, whether or not you've got people that are going to be lined up to be co-sponsors, and just generally the merit of the bill itself. If I think it's a good idea, And my prism of public policy is that it's got to be good for of the state. You know, this is something that's good public policy. And if it's that, then I'm on board, whether it comes to my committee or if it goes to another committee. And if it meets all those descriptions, I've always felt it a privilege to carry a piece of legislation.
Mhm.
Rob, this is a question for Rob and Tom. Which milestones in Maryland Wine's legislative history stand out most to you?
Well, I would say if I could go way back, the Maryland Wine Festival was a really important move because a number of wineries said back in those days when festivals were very large that's what enabled them to survive from year to year. And the Wine in the Woods Festival came 4 years later, and that built up the resources to pay for grapes for the coming vintage. Those two did, and that was super important in its period. I would say following that, the Modernization Act and direct shipping are really the Modernization Act. I think is the most spectacularly successful single piece of legislation because it instead of piecemealing, it brought a number of things together that were important to us. I remember when Dr. Charles Ehart visited Bordy towards the end of his tenure, and it was the first time he'd actually visited a winery, if you can believe it. He'd been in that position for over 20 years, I think, Mac. And he showed up at Bordy, and after asking where the restroom was, he looked around, he said, "Do you know that what you're doing here is illegal?" That's the first thing he said to me. That, because I'd offered him a sample of wine. He said, "You know that you're not technically allowed to sample wine." So that was just before the Modernization Act, and it just showed how we still lived in the dark ages here. And if you're going to invest a lot of money in a business, and particularly if you're going to go to a bank, you need a good legal footing. You really have to have a sound business model that has recognition in the law for what it is that you're trying to undertake, and we lacked that for decades and decades.
Yeah, I have to agree with Rob. I think that was a sentinel piece of legislation for us. We joined the industry right about the time that passed and went into effect. And if you come forward to today, we would not be able to do the types of things that we do to support our community now during the pandemic. I can't tell you the number of people who come to Doden and say, "This is the only place that I will go because I'm able to sit outside, enjoy nature, connect, and linger for a little while in what I feel is a safe place." So that, I think, is a far-reaching bill, and I'd like to thank Rob and Senator Middleton for their role in that, because it's really, I think, been a real community service, meeting your standard, Senator Middleton. So there's that. Looking forward, and I'm going to go back to 2017. I don't think it's fully appreciated yet, but the projections for the climate crisis are really scary for agriculture. And in 2017, the legislature had the foresight to establish a healthy soil program. The regulations around that have not been sort of fleshed out yet. I'm fortunate to be on a committee that's working on that now. But if we have an opportunity to, or we have a real opportunity through that building, restoring, regenerating the soil of the state, the agricultural soils of the state, we can reduce, and I don't know that we can ever eliminate, but we can reduce the negative consequences of the extreme weather events that we're seeing in our vineyards that make it harder and harder to grow grapes, but also in all agriculture across the state, and also to sequester 10 or 15% of the carbon that we need to draw down out of the atmosphere. So I think that's going to be when we're having this conversation 10 years from now, I think we will look back on that legislation, if we're successful at developing the types of programs that could grow out of that, and say that that was a sentinel piece of legislation for our industry and for all of agriculture, especially the food system.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that, but before I do, with another thing that I'm involved in right now, but I want to go back, since we're talking about history, another little piece of history. And another proud moment that I had is joining the Republicans in a filibuster against a tobacco tax. So it wasn't a tobacco tax, it was a piece of legislation that would have allowed the attorneys representing the states that were suing the big tobacco companies to use statistical analysis. And the difference with that is that here before that, the tobacco companies could have the right to interrogate every single person that said that they had health had been impacted by cigarette smoking, which made it impossible. Statistical analysis would have just taken a group of statistics of people that smoked and used that as evidence. And after that, there was a settlement. But we were able to get a piece of an amendment to that bill that said, if in fact there is going to be a settlement, that part of that money, 5% of that money, would go to Southern Maryland, where we raise tobacco, to help us diversify agriculture, to get us away from raising tobacco. That passed, and that became the money that we started to use to put together the Southern Maryland Ag Development Commission, which I think has got some recognition around the states as probably one of the sort of an incubator for ideas and what impacts there are in agriculture itself. So one of the things that we did is we took some of that money, provided grants. One grant that we gave was to the University of Maryland to develop a cultivar that was a grape that would be conducive to this climate in our soils. That was one thing we did. The other thing is we engaged in a program that would pay part of the money for those growers that wanted to invest into producing grapes, that we would actually buy the plants for them. So there are two things that were part that helped to stimulate that growing grapes in the state of Maryland. And if you look at the difference that made in Southern Maryland, prior to that, we didn't have a single vineyard, not a single vineyard in Southern Maryland. And look at where we are today. We've got 2 or 3 of the nicest vineyards. And so just a part of history, walking down memory lane. Fast forward, segue to what you said, Tom. That is a great study that's ongoing. And as a matter of fact, I'm the president of the Harry Hughes Center for Agroecology. And we undertook an extensive review of our strategic plan. And we just are finishing up that process. And climate change and the things associated with it have become our #1 priority, where we're going to be focusing our attention. Since that time, we have now engaged in a conversation that we have to look at how vulnerable agriculture is with climate change. Healthy soils is one aspect, but just exactly what are the challenges and the opportunities for agriculture as we are experiencing and seeing climate change intensify right before our eyes. So we have a meeting, as a matter of fact, tomorrow morning with the Department of Agriculture. We're hoping that the Department of Agriculture will partner with us to put together the framework for a study to identify who the stakeholders should be. If we're going to look at the vulnerability of agriculture, look who the stakeholders ought to be. What will be the scope of the study? What are the resources that are going to be needed? What are the research components associated with it? So hopefully, and I've spoken to the chairs of the 2 committees, Senator Penske and also Delegate Barbe, as to whether or not they would be agreeable to an amendment to one of the climate change bills. So the Department of Agriculture is very enthusiastic. I know the big concern is going to come next year if we get the amendment on of the study. How are you going to pay for the study? But sitting here talking to you, certainly one of the stakeholders, one of the people that have got to be at the table are going to be our grape growers, because that is becoming a very important piece of our agriculture. And if you look at what's happening on the West Coast, what's happening there is threatening the whole winery business there. So does that present an opportunity for us over here on the East Coast? And if it does, with our climate change, have we got the right cultivars to deal with that, or the things that we have to do as far as that research? Those are things that a vulnerability study will be looking at, challenges and opportunities. So I'm glad we're having this conversation, and maybe if we can get in this set, perhaps we can get some support for the amendment from your association.
Let's discuss it.
I think I can speak for our committee, but I know I'd personally be glad to do that. I'm on the board of Future Harvest, and I think they'd be very interested in that. When you mention stakeholders, it's not just us as growers, it's also everybody who eats.
Yep, absolutely.
Which is almost all of us. There actually are a few people that aren't eating, but it is almost all of us that eat food.
Yeah. Well, California. I said California years ago did that. They started noticing all the drought and whatnot, and they did it. They were the first state in the country that actually did a vulnerability study. So we have something there that could be a model that we could use putting together our study. Yeah, it's important to have the stakeholders in there, but any of these discussions, I'm a firm believer, any of these discussions where you expect some outcomes and recommendations and whatnot, you need to make sure that the farming community, those people that are actually there producing, are in the forefront. A lot of times we have scientists and others and consumer groups and others that make those decisions that a lot of times the farming community aren't going to go along with them. So if we're going to move it in the right direction, key to it is making sure that we engage the farmers who are very, very busy. They're hard to engage,
yes,
especially if it's a long process. But that's got to be core to this whole entire thing.
Yeah. One of the things from a public policy standpoint that I think a lot about, and that the winery industry is actually a great model of that, is we want to decentralize our food system, or particularly the production. There's a study from the mid-90s actually that a drought in Russia created a famine in Central Africa. And you can have those widespread effects if all of your food production is centralized. So having our own set of critical infrastructure to be able to produce our own food and other agricultural products is going to be really important as we move forward, particularly with these extreme weather events like the derecho in Iowa, for example.
Yeah, there's another facet to that, Tom, is that now we have this pandemic. So you overlay that situation with the pandemic. And this may be the first of more to come. And certainly if we don't learn something from it, just exactly what you said, we have to start decentralizing. Look at how many people are going hungry, and look how much food is being destroyed because we can't connect the food to where people need it. We didn't plan for it, but we know now that it could very well happen again. And we need to make sure that if in fact that happens. So we need to look at little moms and pop operations, smaller facilities for slaughterhouses and whatnot, as opposed to these big, huge corporations where everything is centralized. And if they get an outbreak, look what happens, they shut down.
Yes.
So Mac, if I could put in a plug for land preservation at the same time, I think that if we don't have the basic resource, if we don't protect that resource, even though it may seem now that the food comes from Mexico and California Central Valley, it won't always be coming from there. And
Yeah.
I feel Baltimore and Maryland is uniquely positioned to feed its populace because we actually have been reasonably successful in conserving land. I say reasonably because more than should be is paved over every year, but we still have a lot of really good land that we can put into production. Yeah. But we are in a weird place because I heard you say you're looking at hemp for fiber, and farmers have to find new ways to be profitable. That's why I'm in the wine business, frankly, because the old beef farm and crop farm we ran in turkeys just wasn't making it anymore years ago. And all of us are in that position every day of having to rethink ourselves and reimagine what agriculture really is.
So from a historical perspective, I want to again thank Senator Middleton and Rob for what they did, because particularly the Modernization Act, but even before that, those efforts provided a model that I think can be used across the food system. And then to Rob's point, Kevin, will bring you back into the conversation, because you lead an organization that's focused on value-added products. And one of the things here is that we want to bring more of the revenue from the production back onto the farm. And the way we do that is by adding value. We make wine from grapes. We make jam from strawberries. We do agritourism types of activities like Senator Middleton does on his farm. So there are a lot of activities that can help keep the farmers going, but also keep food affordable for those who are in need.
Gentlemen, I must give my apologies. I am still farming. I have a load of hay on my round bales of hay on my wagon. I can hear from my little shop down here, my cows are calling for me. So
Go.
So I really and truly wanted to join. When I got the invitation from Kevin, he'll tell you I jumped right on it, because it would be an opportunity to reconnect with a person that I have so much respect for, and consider him one of the best friends that I made in my 24 years career at Maryland. It was one of the best efforts that we've ever been involved in. And I must say, Bob, every step of the way, as controversial as it was, you were always first a gentleman in every one of those discussions.
And likewise to you. Thank you so much.
So you all enjoy yourself. Tom, it was a pleasure meeting you, and I hope I have the opportunity that our paths may cross. And I'm hoping, with my fingers crossed, that we will pursue this whole vulnerability study. And I know you'll be involved in that. So I'm looking forward to that effort.
Thank you, Mac.
Thank you for the invitation.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Mac, take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
So that was a little surprise visit.
Yeah,
what a man. Would he please run for president? Oh my God, what a man.
So looking at I mean, just listening to what we just mentioned. So we're here talking about the wine industry, but Tom, you're talking about the environment, healthy soils. Rob, you're talking about land preservation. Mac was talking about, all kinds of feasibility studies and turning tobacco buyout money into grapes, which, brought us the award-winning wines from Port of Leonardtown. So that's a direct connection there as to how some of these programs work. We've got lots of stuff that we're thinking about this session too already.
Yes.
Yeah, Tom. Tell us some of the priorities.
So I think the first priority is to make permanent some of the changes that came with the pandemic. And they've worked tremendously, both in terms of providing new outlets for wine, but as I mentioned earlier, providing a safe spot for people to be, because most of the wineries are on farms, not all of them. And so we have space, and that's provided a really nice outlet for people. A couple of those changes that we've been able to do, we've been able to deliver directly to people's homes. Before that, they had to come here, and very often had to get out or come inside or do whatever. That delivery option has worked really well for our wine club here at Doden. Another is that we've been doing sort of on-site drive-through delivery or pickup, and that's been a very useful tool for everybody to be able to purchase local products. And a lot of people have discovered the local products, and they've been really terrific. I've been amazed at how people have really supported local businesses during the pandemic. Anything from you, Rob?
With respect to the upcoming legislative agenda, I think there's a move for chain stores to pick up the selling of of wine and beer, maybe spirits as well. I'm not sure. And I'll be honest, I'll stick my neck out a little bit. That scares me. And I say that because I've tried to do business in some areas outside of Maryland where chain stores do sell wine. And it's extremely hard to get a toe in the door. It's extremely hard to get someone to call you back. We deal, 40 Vineyards deals with about, between restaurants and stores, about 800 accounts. Every one of them's a personality. And it's actually a lot of fun. Sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes it's extremely pleasurable and rewarding, but I respect how hard these people work. I respect that they have immense challenges running their businesses. And I think from business person to business person, it works. The chemistry is good. And so I feel very guarded about a future in which we're dealing with 11 or 12 possibly out-of-state managers for large chains. That worries me. So I'll just put that out there. I don't know which way this will go, and I certainly will work with the industry, whatever we decide to do.
We've also got a proposed sales tax increase on alcohol, which will be up for discussion as well, taking it from 9% to 10%. And so Tom, our committee will have that on its discussion block coming up. And there's also, I believe there's another bill to create a bottle redemption recycling fee-based program again. So we'll have that to look at. Again, none of these, all too exciting to the general public, although nobody likes to be taxed. But for us in our industry, and I've got a little graphic if I can pull this up. Jim from our team put this together, and Tom, this goes to talking a little bit about what you were mentioning. So the Wineries Association is teaming up with the brewers and the distillers to focus on these 4 things, and that's direct-to-consumer shipping, which the wineries, as we talked about, have had since 2011, but the governor set forth a new path for applying for the ability to ship, which is much more streamlined than the law we came up with after grand negotiations for a number of years back in 2011. Statewide door-to-door delivery, so manufacturers can deliver right to consumers. Wineries have had their caps on how much they can sell lifted. Breweries and distilleries in certain classes have had caps. And then there's the flexible licensing fees that we have a proposal out to make that a little easier. Right now, the way the license fees for our industry goes, you either pay the fee or your license is revoked. And so they had to suspend the fees entirely as opposed to being able to adjust the licensing fees. So, there's a lot to discuss. And then you add in all of the legislature's big focus, primary focus, which is on healthcare and COVID-related health and education reforms. And then you've got policing reforms and other big top priorities. So, I didn't get a chance to ask Mac, but, how as a chair of a committee, he was chair of the finance committee, could he help decide and prioritize when you've got hundreds of different groups asking for hundreds of different changes? So, Rob, a question for you, just looking back, like I came on the scene in 2003, 2004, you were just granted the ability to offer samples. What was it like before then?
Well, the good news is we didn't know we weren't allowed to do it.
which was great.
That's why I offered Charlie Ehart one when he came in the door. So what was like, here's what it was like. It was the dark ages. And in fact, in Article 2B, which is, everyone knows, is the large tome that regulates our industry, in the dark years, if it didn't say that we could do something, the answer was no. Since some new personalities have come on the scene, if it doesn't say no in Article 2B, the answer is yes. And that is a real sea change in attitude. And I remember Dr. Ehart's successor, whose name I probably am better off for not remembering, used to show up at our meetings with a .45 automatic on his hip, which wasn't exactly a warm and friendly feeling either. And we were made to know from the very beginning of every meeting with him and his staff where we stood. Again, it was stay in your lane. Don't try to do things that violate the three-tier system. It's sacrosanct, and stay in your place.
Yeah, we'll not discuss or identify that person, but I will give kudos to Jeff Kelly and Comptroller Peter Francho, who have been extremely supportive of the industry. And as and Lou Berman is another name, Dave Galinsky, the inspectors there. They've been very helpful when we do get into a situation where we don't understand what the rules are, because the rules, not only are they tough to understand, but they do change. As we're making changes, other groups are making changes, which sometimes impact us. So it's been great to have an elected leader and staff who actually want to support the industry they regulate, rather than just come in guns a-blazing, literally guns drawn.
Literally, yeah. Well, I will say that since Comptroller Francho came into that position, that we have been inspected more regularly than we had been in the past. And I feel that what he has brought to his office and to the culture of the Comptroller's office is a sense of fairness, where we know the rules, because people such as Lou Berman, who are experts in the rules, and yourself, Kevin, help explain them to us, and we do our best to follow them, but occasionally you run afoul unintentionally. But it's not punitive, it's corrective. And again, it's an attempt to make our industry be what it can be and not hold us back, while watching out for the general interest of the state of Maryland and for the public we serve. So I feel that the culture in the Comptroller's office went through an about face with Peter Francho's election that was very favorable yet fair, and appropriately watching watching that the laws were followed.
Where do you both, and one person that we have not mentioned who deserves, I think, all of the credit, is Pat Roddy, who's and Mike Johansson and the team at Rifkin, who have guided us and join our calls weekly, and then guided us in Annapolis and helped us navigate not just writing the bills and coming up with ideas, but finding sponsors and getting us there to testify, and telling us what and what not to say and when to say it and who to say it to. I would have invited Pat on, but being that it's opening day of session, Pat's got his hands full.
Yeah, right. Every time I had a good idea, Pat would say, "Rob, don't do that. Here's what you should do." No, he is a genius with a sense of humor, and I think Pat is an absolutely marvelous man, and he's brilliant. He's great at what he does. He's respected. He's a great tactician, and he's just got an instinct for the work that we've been extremely fortunate to have him as a partner.
Well, and in addition to all that, he's very good about bringing people together, whether it's bringing owners together with legislators, whether it's bringing potentially opposing parties together to work out their differences. So they have been, Pat and the folks at Rifkin have been extraordinarily helpful, but also good mentors.
Yeah.
I know Rob told me that before I took over from him as the chair, but it's something that I've learned firsthand.
And Alan Rifkin, I suppose, one of the top 3 or 4 in the firm, one of the founders of the firm, has stepped in from time to time and has always brought a tremendous amount of intelligence and savvy to critical moments. Particularly, I think he was helpful in the Modernization Act, as I recall.
Very much so. That and self-distribution and yeah, the
challenge, the big challenge. We haven't talked about that, but maybe that's for another day. That's right.
The big challenge, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask, where do you think the future is for Maryland wine? What do you think? What do you think legislatively, regulatorily? Where are we headed?
So I think the big picture, Kevin, maybe 2 or 3 different things. Senator Middleton mentioned the 3-tier system, and that goes back to prohibition and defines the different levels of the industry: manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers. And we've seen that breaking down, but I think it needs to be fully broken down. The reasons for that system no longer exist. And of course, what happens is you get differences in market power that become entrenched, and you don't want to see the changes. And I think another thing that the senator mentioned was how you can take an entrenched system like that and mitigate the damage for the people who would perceive themselves to be losers. So the tobacco farmers were provided with resources and education and other things, actually, that allowed them to recreate their farms in healthy ways without just going out of business or selling out. So I think that continuing to break down the 3-tier system without harming our customers in the retail and wholesale industry is one thing that needs to be done. The climate crisis, and I've recently taken to calling it the crisis because I've been reading a lot about it, is something that we are going to have to grapple with and partner with our with all of our agricultural colleagues. But vineyards and orchards, which also produce wine, if you think about cider and other things, are in a unique position because our vineyards are largely perennial and diverse, which is the single most important system for sequestering carbon. So we really need to emphasize that more vineyards in the state would help create sequester that carbon. And so and the biodiversity we were talking about, the different aspects of agriculture that can contribute. Biodiversity is very, very essential to rebuilding that system. So maybe those would be my 2 big things: providing more opportunities for sales of wine, the related more opportunities for sales of value-added products, and to create more value added, which benefit Marylanders, and diversify and decentralize that system. We've done a great job at that, but we have much further to go. And the climate crisis would be the 3 things I'd want to work on.
I'll just add, I think that there's still at the local level a lot of brush on the tracks that needs to be cleared, and that's because value-added farmers are still rather an odd breed because we try to do it all, and it's a little bit like the analogy with the 3-tier system. We do all of the above. We're growers, we're producers, we're wholesalers, we're retailers, and we also are sometimes food vendors. We do all of the above. And with respect to the buildings that we inhabit and the zoning laws that govern us, they tend to be more in sort of silos, to use an agricultural term. And we're really an open field. We're multidisciplinary, and that has yet to be fully recognized and appropriately dealt with at the regulatory level. And it's not trivial. It's actually costly and hugely inhibitory to the growth of value-added agriculture in Maryland. So I see a rather large but rather glamorous challenge there that we have to face, and it's going to be skirmishes. I can't see how it's going to be done necessarily at state level, but it's going to be skirmishes at the local level, which are very time-consuming and very costly, unfortunately. The only other thing I would add quickly is that I think that I feel very, very optimistic about the industry from a perspective of public perception. I feel frightened to death about climate change. I think that is is the biggest existential threat. And I'll just add to what Tom and Mac and you, Kevin, have been saying. It's colossal. It's very scary.
Just in closing, because we're coming up on the end of the hour, those who are not in the wine industry, who are just consumers, those who are not in the government affairs side of things, and who just want to enjoy a glass of wine, what's your kind of one-liner of what they should know about law and Annapolis and the evolution hereof?
The less, the better.
Yeah, boy. What would be a one-liner? I would say buy local. And with regard to Annapolis, we want to break down the barriers so that becomes easier for our fellow Maryland residents.
It's good for everybody. And at this point, there's so much good wine to be found in the Maryland industry that you can buy local and enjoy a very fine glass of wine at the same time.
All right, so buy local is the prescription.
Certainly is.
Well, look, thank you to you both for joining and having this wandering but very, very informative talk. You know, I think it follows the path of just how we're regulated. People, I don't think customers don't understand that, you know, it's like nuclear regulation and then alcohol in terms of how we're regulated. So everything we do is taxed and regulated, and we're told what to do and when to do it. And Rob, you've been told what not to do over the years, more than either of us. So, listen, thank you very much for the informative discussion, and best to you both.
Thank you, Kevin. Great job. And thanks for bringing Senator Middleton on. That was a real treat.
So good to see you, Rob.
Well, likewise, Tom. Thank you so much.
Cheers, gentlemen. So with that wraps up another Wine Wednesday. You can find all of our different chats archived on YouTube and Facebook. I want to thank everybody for your ongoing support. And as I've been doing of late, just give you a pitch to check out our Maryland Wine Explorer Club, which will be opening up again next week. So if you're not a subscriber, it'd be a good time to subscribe for a red pack or a white pack. That's 3 wines 4 times a year, and there's no commitment. So you can pull out of that, cancel, add on, double up, whatever you'd like to do, whenever you'd like to do it. We also have an interesting themed pack that we'll be offering related to the history and heritage of Maryland wine. So tune in for that. Stay tuned on MarylandWine.com. And thank you all so much for being involved.